Hey guys, I just wanted to make a quick follow-up video to the video that I had released yesterday in regards to finances, in regards to how my wife and I, can basically live for a couple of months without any income, without any paychecks. I wanted to clarify as I started off the video with a couple of things. No, my wife and I did not come from money. We both came from middle-class families. We were not gifted large sums of money throughout our marriage that had any impact on our ability to take time off from work. Number two, I'm not receiving any unemployment from the government. I'm not receiving any government benefits. So just to get that out of the way, I think the topic of finances, I think the topic of stewardship is often neglected when we discuss money. It's a taboo subject that I think a lot of people have differing opinions. And so, but I believe, basically by using a lot of common sense principles and living well below your means, that most people can get out of debt relatively quickly. Most people can save money if they're really intentional about that. So I just share all of this, not to brag, boast, but to hopefully encourage you guys, hopefully to give you ideas about how to trim, how to save. I think, it's gotten to a point in society and culture where, yeah, it's true that groceries are expensive. The cost of living, the cost of rent is very high. But also I would argue that our lifestyles in general, we as a society, our lifestyles are very inflated, and we all think that we need more than we actually need. Just a brief background. My wife and I, as we got married, we obviously talked about our families, what backgrounds we came from, and a really good thing that we had going for us is that we were on the same page financially. We both came from families that instilled, I would say, pretty good financial literacy, sound financial principles, that taught us about, bad debt versus good debt, like in getting a mortgage, just giving us a pretty good baseline of how to manage our money. And also both of our parents, I think, have modeled that very well. So my wife and I were very grateful for the backgrounds we have come from in that regard, and the many good things of coming from the families that we came from. So as we started our marriage, I was a newly graduated nurse practitioner. My wife was a nurse. We could have easily said, well, let's get an apartment, a nicer apartment for $1,000+ a month. We could have easily afforded this. And I think many people fall into this trap whenever you're starting a new life experience, whenever you've attained a certain level in your life that you would say is successful. A lot of times we believe that, we need to bolster our lifestyles and we somehow deserve nice things. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like it's wrong to have good things. It's not wrong to live in a nice place, but I think oftentimes we do this as a detriment to our finances. So my wife and I, instead of getting a nice apartment where we'd be spending $1,000+ a month when all the utilities and internet are included, I took a little bit more time in our search for finding a place for us to live, and I found a little 600 square foot house that had shortly come on the market and was up for rent. And so we ended up paying $630 a month for that little house. Was it a great house? No. Was it fancy? Was it modern? Was it updated? No. But it was a safe place to live in a good neighborhood that was close enough that we needed for our work. It wasn't our dream place. It wasn't a place where we were going to start a family, but it was a means to an end. It was a place that suited our needs and that would allow us to save several $100s extra a month, because your rent, it's not going towards anything. So that was one of the key things that we did that I think set us up early on to save money. Now, my wife and I both, our parents did help us some for our education, but we both ended up with loans in our undergrad, and I had some money that I needed to pay back after my master's. And so we both, before we got married, we basically paid off our undergrad. And as we had met and started dating, I was cash flowing my master's the best I could, and I was still working at the time. But we got married, and I was fortunate that my wife had some money in savings that she was able to accrue, as she was already working as a nurse and had already paid off her student loans like a year or so before. And so we were able to use that money after we had joined our bank accounts to pay off the rest of my loans. No, it wasn't anything crazy like $50,000 or $100,000. My wife and I don't have stories of paying off huge student loans. We were pretty blessed in how we approached higher education and making sure that we weren't incurring a ton of debt. But I can remember a few months after we had gotten married and we had paid off the last of our student loans, we had less than $1,000 in our checking account, and we didn't have any other savings accounts. And so I can remember, that was only like 8.5 years ago or so that we had less than $1,000 in our bank account. And I kind of look back and reflect, and I chuckle a little bit to myself that we only had that much money at a certain point of time. However, we had a lot going for us. We both had jobs that we could earn a pretty decent living, and we didn't have car payments, and the rent was very inexpensive, pretty low. So we were still in a really good financial position early on to save a lot of money. A lot of people, I think, a trap they fall into is, after you've gotten that great job or you've gotten this level of success, then you think you need a better car. Both my wife and I, we waited over a year before we upgraded any of our cars. And so I kept my little Toyota Corolla because I had a bit of a commute for my job. And so that is a super reliable vehicle. It's economical. I had no repairs at all when I was driving that. So I drove that for like probably 4 or 5 years after we got married because it was just a good, reliable commuter car. So a lot of people make mistakes in just thinking that they need to upgrade to a nicer car. And I think that is, not the best idea for most people. So my wife and I, we ended up upgrading her vehicle over a year after we were married. And I remember, we paid cash for that. We had gotten a used Subaru Outback from a dealership in Atlanta. And I just remember, the look on their face as we were going through the paperwork, as we were meeting with the finance department, they were trying to get us to get a loan. And, I kept pushing back. I was like, no, we're going to pay cash for this. And they kept going back and forth with me like, are you sure you don't want a loan? Like, this financing, it's only a certain amount a month. It's not much interest. And I was like, no. And so, we wrote them the check for the full price of the vehicle. It cleared. But you could tell they were shocked because not many people do this. And so, those are just some of the things that my wife and I did that I think put us ahead of the game early on. I think the biggest problem nowadays with expenses being so high is that people are having difficulty getting traction. They're having difficulty getting ahead in life. The times that we were living in now is different than when my wife and I started our lives 8-9 years ago. But I think the biggest thing that people need to get is traction with their finances. And so usually that's lowering your monthly expenses going out. And usually that's also getting your income up as high as you can. Now, right now, my wife and I, we're not in a position where we can save a ton of money just because we have a family, because sometimes I'm in between assignments for weeks or even months where we don't always have steady income. So it looks a little bit different for how we save and get ahead now when we have 3 kids. But still, you can apply these principles to your life. What is the whole point of what I'm telling you? Am I telling you that you should go save a bunch of money and get out of debt so you can have a life of ease? No. Now, undoubtedly, if you do these things, your life in some ways is going to be easier, right? You're not going to have the financial pressures, the stressors of most people that live in society, right? You're not going to be worried about where your next month's rent's going to come. You're not going to worry about the next emergency that could derail you and get you further into debt. But this is not about getting out of debt, of living luxuriously, so you can just have an easy life. No, I'd like you guys to think about bigger things, especially some of the men here that are listening. I'm talking to you. Maybe at one point in your life, you've dreamed about doing something cool. Maybe you were a boy and you had this dream of doing a certain profession where you could help each other. I believe a lot of those desires that we had as children, even as young adults, as young men, are very God-given, right? And in some way or another, and I can say this has probably happened in my life, that life sort of derails these dreams that we once had. I think as men, we are called to provide for our families. We are called to take care of those around us, not just even in our families, but our friends. We're called to be, protectors. We're called to be providers. We are called to give generously to those people who are in need. And so I'd like you guys just to think long term. What getting out of debt, what giving yourself some financial margin could mean. Maybe it means if you're not happy in your profession, maybe it means that it's a means for you to segue into something bigger where you can use your God-given talents for His glory, where you can, take a pay cut because you're doing something that you're genuinely passionate about, that you can help others better through. Maybe you have a difficult work situation and there's a hostile work environment and you need to create some space for you to step away and to really think big about how can you spend the rest of your working career helping other people? How can you spend it providing for your family? How can you spend it benefiting humanity? I think a lot of us with debt, we're stuck in this trap. And society and culture, the environment that we're living in, it keeps on trying to pull us back in to this nasty cycle of consumerism, of this nasty cycle of essentially being a slave. There's a Bible verse in Proverbs, the borrower is slave to the lender. There's not a more true statement than that. A lot of people out there, you think you're free, you think you have autonomy and you think you have agency, but you have so many debt payments that you're making every month. And so I encourage specifically the men to think bigger by getting out of debt, by creating some margin in your lives. How can your dreams be fulfilled better? How can you provide better for those that you love and care for? How can you give more generously? How can you change the local community that you're in because you live in a different way, right? And you're in a position where you can help people more. That's the end game. That's ultimately why this matters, why this is so important. The peace that you have when you get out of debt, it's until you experience it, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. And so I just encourage some of the men out here to dream bigger, to think bigger, to think about what God could do for you, do through you, through your life and the talents that He's blessed you with.